Ladies and gentlemen, please silence your phones and hush your babies. The show is about to start.
I offer my personal welcome to this
Nemo
and conference
halftime
show.
So that is what happens when you press the wrong button. This is not the Nemo Conference halftime show. It's a very professional operation over here, as you can tell. But you know what? It's almost as big as a conference halftime show, because what we're looking at this evening is the church's safeguarding training. The training that the church has provided. Well, sort of. The presentation that's going to be given on a fifth Sunday to get everyone up to speed with what the new policies and procedures are around UK safeguarding. And with me, I have the ladies of 21st Century Saints, so that they can put me right and generally help me out. Hey, ladies.
Hey.
Right, so I think we can jump almost straight into the presentation, because if you haven't seen already, 30-second recap. What's going on in the UK at the moment is groundbreaking, and it's all thanks to these ladies that we got safeguarding checks in the UK. Background checks are being done on people that work with children and youth in the church, and that's just kind of wonderful. Jane, you look like you want to say something.
No, this is just my happy face.
Just basking in the joy. Oh yeah, because I did ask Jane to smile earlier, and she will bring that up, I'm sure, as some sort of pseudo chauvinism. But here we have it. Safeguarding policies and procedures of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And this is of public note, of public worth, that we be going over this now, because if you're a vulnerable person or are going to be sending your child to a Mormon church, you need to know what people are going to be taught about the policies and procedures and what those are. So it's absolutely in the public interest that we do this. There's my little legal disclaimer. But this is available on the church's website. I'll put the link in the description so you can go check it out yourself. It's amongst the other resources. They're not even password protected. You don't have to be a member of the church with an account. Anyone can see this. So just not many people have yet. So it's a little bit exclusive. So let's have a look, shall we? Any thoughts, ladies, before we start?
Just that this is what is going to be, leaders are being asked to present this. So far, this is the version that we have of it online. I would love to see some updates to it and it to improve before we get to the fifth Sunday. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's to be presented on a fifth Sunday in the wards and stakes around the United Kingdom.
Yeah, this is the church's warning. This is kind of like a warning shot across the bow to say, like, be careful, this isn't very good. Spoiler. You might want to update some things before you actually start showing this to people. So hopefully, this is already version 1.7. If you look at the file as you download it, this was version 1.7. So they've redrafted this a couple of times, and let's hope we'll see version 1.9 or whatever before we before it actually launches into wards. So let's have a look. Right. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is committed to safeguarding and promoting the welfare of children, youth and adults at risk. All members and anyone who participates in church meetings or events, without exception, have the right to protection from abuse, regardless of gender, race, disability, sexual orientation, religion/beliefs, pregnancy, maternity and gender reassignment. All concerns and allegations of abuse will be taken seriously by the Church. Anyone who becomes aware of practices or incidences which may put vulnerable people at risk or harm should immediately report. Any party making such a report will be treated with respect. Ooh, sounds good. Right, but let's see if they can put their money where their mouth is. And they're backing it all up with doctrine so far. And just for those watching, I'm gonna blitz through some of these slides because it is a long presentation. But I want to read them all out so those that are going to be listening can listen, and then we'll get thoughts as and when the juicy stuff starts. But this is the doctrinal backing around safeguarding, which is Matthew 18:6. Whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged around his neck, and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Then it's got Ephesians, husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. And then Exodus 20:12, honour thy father and thy mother. What do we think, ladies, of the doctrinal backing?
I love a theology foundation to safeguard it, because it has to work for the church, doesn't it? But I think instead of telling people to honour thy father and thy mother, which is a very difficult message if you're actually being abused by your father and your mother, it's a very difficult message. I think I'd rather put something like Doctrine and Covenants 10:16, worth the souls is great in the sight of God. But, just a suggestion. Because we don't want to tell people to honour their parents if their parents are being abusive or neglectful, do we?
That's true. That's a good point.
I'd say we don't want to get into the habit of creating a policy, then bringing some scriptures out for backup. That doesn't help. Everything that any faith organization or organization needs to do should be underpinned by doctrine, by a theology of safeguarding. So we have a really problematic set of things that are happening in the scriptures, and so if you're gonna jump in and acknowledge that that's where we start off with. But
Yeah, I personally don't believe anymore, and therefore these scriptures are completely irrelevant to me. However, I still think the church should be a safe place to go, whether you're going there as a non-believer, believer of a different faith. It should be a safe place. I think it's redundant to put the scriptures in, and I think there's an audacity to doing that because they've spent a long time being the abusers and creating a safe place for grooming to take place. I actually think you don't back up, you'd have a fire drill for churches, you have a first aid box for churches. We don't need to back up using the first aid kit with scripture. If somebody's hurt themselves, you go and get the first aid kit and help them. You don't need to back it up with scripture for it to be relevant. This is safeguarding. Irrespective of somebody's beliefs, this is safeguarding.
Yeah.
And I also think it's really good. The point I was going to make is that the church has been at this game for a long time. These scriptures have been around through all of that. So why are they only now just seemingly listening to those scriptures? Why is it only now they care about trying to hang millstones around the neck of abusers?
Yeah.
So there's lots of things I don't have to say about this, but I think it's just really important that the reason why we have to do this is with any faith community, no matter who you are, is if you are a religious group, because faith groups see abuse happen in a particularly religious way, it plays out in unique ways, we end up using same stories that can be manipulated and twisted. So that theological underpinning has to be very, very tight. It means we're identifying a shared language, we're identifying shared boundaries, and we're identifying shared values around what safeguarding is. So yeah, pain in the ass if you're not interested in it, but it means that where, for example, anyone who is looking at this from a legal point of view needs to be aware of what that language is that we're using.
And I think also a lot of the research that was done around the ISCO inquiry and other pieces of research says that any faith community has to build on a foundation of theology, of a foundation of theology for their particular community to actually take something. We should take it seriously without that. But if it helps take it seriously, then let's do it.
Yeah, and they continue with some of this, and of course it wouldn't be a church presentation in this day and age in 2023 without quoting Russell M. Nelson. So they talk about how during his ministry the Lord showed special concern and compassion for disabled people. He said, have ye any that are lame or blind or halt or maimed or leprous or that are withered or that are deaf or that are afflicted in any manner? Bring them hither, for I have compassion upon you. Those with physical, emotional or mental disability are particularly vulnerable to abuse. That's good. They're not just focusing on children, which is children are important, but it's good that they're covering a wider range here. Abuse constitutes the influence of the adversary as a grievous sin. As president of the church, I affirm the teachings of the Lord Jesus Christ on this issue. Let me be perfectly clear. Any kind of abuse of women, children, or anyone is an abomination to the Lord. He grieves and I grieve whenever anyone is harmed. He mourns, and we all mourn, for each person who has fallen victim to abuse of any kind. Those who perpetrate these hideous acts are not only accountable to the laws of man, but will also face the wrath of Almighty God. Some pretty strong words there from Russell Nelson.
As will anyone who actually allows abuse to take place because they don't take it seriously when it happens in the church.
Well, is that they draw near to me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me? And it feels like some of this is lip service by Russell M. Nelson to try and distance himself from the Arizona case, given that that's when this talk came out. The church had to put on a big public front about abuse being an important issue. Go on, Jane.
So this is a long way of explaining to church members or non-church members what our terms are. So we've got the the authority of the scriptures. That's the theological underpinning. We're also appealing to the authority of some Jesus stuff and some Russell M. Nelson stuff. Who are your authority figures that are speaking? There's been lots of quotes you could have used, but we have to use those to lend it that weight of authority. And then we go on to talk about what those terms are as it applies to the law. What is safeguarding going to look like? So it's about getting our terms right, and making sure that we know that we're all speaking the same language.
And they go on to do that in this next slide, where they put some definitions out. Abuse is the mistreatment or neglect of others in a way that causes physical, sexual, emotional, or financial harm. The church's position is that abuse cannot be tolerated in any form. Those who abuse their spouses, children, or other family members, or anyone else, violate the laws of God and man. Abuse of a child or youth is an especially serious sin. Now, it's interesting there, and we will not go down this rabbit hole, but they talk about causing financial harm, and this is a church that goes into very poor parts of the world and tells people to give them 10% of their money. Yeah. So, I mean, let's not go there tonight, but that's worth pointing out. Ruth,
it is a big issue, though, it is a big issue with dementia in people, isn't it?
It is,
but
yeah. And
I'll leave the financial stuff to Ruth.
Ruth?
Yeah, I mean, I think this policy has been written. It's the one to get it off the starting blocks, isn't it? But it's the one that's been written with a particular focus on children and youth. You can tell that through some of the focus they have later on in this. And although there's a nod of the hat to financial harm, I think there's a long, long way to go to explore the complexity of how that can play out in the structure of Mormonism. And right from the very roots of Mormonism, I know that we have got a shady history with how finances and people are manipulated financially through the organisation. And to this day, the church is still struggling with that. Sadly, headlines are made on the back of that. So I'm willing to allow them room to grow and to come back to this version 2, version 3, version 4, where we will be able to put some meat on the bones of how they're going to protect people from financial harm within this organisation.
That's good.
And for me, this the previous slide is the first actual red pen mark I would be making on this. So the previous slide, that final statement there, need to appreciate that your audience is going to bring all of their history, all of their experience along with them, while you have leaders that you're preparing to teach and parents who are receiving this information. You also have people in your congregations who have experienced abuse. So that final sentence there, abuse of a child is an especially serious sin. As victims, that's going to be something that you're honing in on. That's going to be, well, am I sinful? Am I inherently sinful? So the language around that needs to be adjusted and checked to bring it more into line with what it actually should say, which is that people who abuse children or youth are guilty of especially serious sins.
Right, so just making it clearer.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair. Because I think that is what you're saying, Jane, is what they're trying to say. But I think the ambiguity in the language there is what's going to cause the.
And
the
I'd like
trickiness.
it to include adults a bit more here as well. But
yeah. Well, so we go to a children and youth slide, and then we do hit vulnerable adults next. So the children and youth slide just gives us some more definitions. Physical abuse is inflicting serious bodily harm by physical violence. Some harm may not be visible. Sexual abuse or exploitation, having any sexual activity with a child or youth, or intentionally allowing or helping others to have such activity. Emotional abuse, using actions and words to seriously damage a child or youth's sense of self-respect or self-worth, like talking about chewed up bubble gum and crusty paper notes. This usually involves repeated and continuing insults, manipulations, and criticisms that humiliate and belittle. It may also include gross neglect. And then child pornography apparently needs no explanation. And I'm kind of glad, because it's always a bit grimy talking about child pornography, but it is a serious issue. Sorry, I got a little bit sassy in there, but I want to get your ladies' thoughts. Just generally throughout this, we're going to see a lot of the pot calling the kettle black by the church. They'll point to things where it's very obvious they don't see themselves as also being the ones that create this kind of emotional harm to people, or where they create these problems, you know. There was something there about earlier on about not discriminating against people based on, and it lists a set of characteristics which the church absolutely does discriminate against people based on, you know, particularly gender identity and things like that. So there's a lot of that going on here. Ruth?
So sexual abuse, a sexual activity could be a conversation about sexual matters.
Yeah.
And I think this should be a great big, line through any of those conversations now taking place within the church, with youth, with children, with talking about children's clothing being pornographic for the other sex, with talking about children and do they masturbate, with talking about children and asking about things they've been thinking about. All of those things now are very clearly sexual abuse. They're not something that you should be raising. And I worry very much that if this training isn't given in the right way by people who actually understand what this could entail, there could be people serving in bishoprics who could then inadvertently have these conversations and then be abusing children. There could be people who are serving in youth who then go on to have these conversations with kids, place themselves in a position of abusing children. These are very, very delicate issues to be teetering around with.
Ruth, I would actually take that further also to the conversations that we hear frequently about that, for example, in young women are taught, and hopefully it's leaving our Mormon world now, but I mean certainly have historically and up until recently been taught that they are responsible for the thoughts and behaviours of the young men. These types of things and teachings are grooming attitudes. So really it's not necessarily just about what actions we're seeing, but the attitudes that we're having. We would really like to see this broadened to include children and youth and adults, members of the church in general, not having a language of abuse that we can use to talk about. So if you're being touched, how is a child going to be able to relay that to a safe adult? The other thing that it doesn't do is to talk about the more current ways that we see child exploitation or grooming or any of these things playing out. For example, from a very young age, children are using apps. Their online dating is a lot more sort of prevalent. What happens when sexuality nudes are just par for the course when a young woman has a social media profile? These things are very much in the milieu, and there isn't any sort of understanding of how youth are engaging with that, I don't believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think going on to the emotional abuse one, when I read that through, I was looking for when children and youth view abuse in the home, that is abusive to them as well. So they might not actually be being physically abused, but if they're witnessing physical or emotional abuse of one parent by another, that's abusive to them as well. And they need to be able to be supported and that abuse understood in the context of how it's going to impact them too. So there's lots and lots of layers to this, and certainly a huge amount more that needs to go into this document to make it relevant for people when they're training it out.
And the church does try and cover vulnerable adults and that abuse of a spouse by saying abuse of a spouse or another adult can occur in many ways. These include physical, sexual, emotional, and financial abuse. And then it links to the general handbook, which I'm sure gives great detail. He says, often there is not a single definition of abuse that can be applied in all situations. Instead, there is a spectrum of severity and abuse behaviour. This spectrum ranges from occasionally using sharp words to inflicting serious harm. So I think that's really useful for a church that's predominantly made up of people that still think of a certain generation of people as snowflakes. There can be that sort of language from certain elements of members of the church, and so for them to realize that abuse isn't just hitting your child or someone hitting their spouse. There are other forms of abuse that can take place, and it happens on a sort of spectrum, as it were. I think that's quite good.
I totally agree, and I think that's kind of sums up most of how I feel about this presentation. Is that there are great elements in it, problematic elements, but it has to go further or be more explicit in some areas. So I reading that, if I have no idea really what it is that I'm looking for, because I feel very safe at church, vulnerable adults, really you're looking at domestic abuse situations. So we're really looking at women, and maybe I might take the leap to think about possibly adults with disabilities, learning disabilities, that kind of thing. The reality is vulnerable adults, elderly people are the most commonly abused vulnerable group that there is, and we have an aging church population. We've also got the LGBTQ community. There is a massive amount of people who aren't really covered, and if you don't say the word, then unfortunately we're going to miss it. So it does need to be spelled out.
Absolutely. And I think I want to go to this next slide, because Sarah could have almost written this slide, and that's a good thing, right?
Oh, good. That's okay then.
This is so. Sarah, could you read this actually? Just this first paragraph.
Most victims are abused by people they know. Such people can be spouses, family members, dating partners, friends, or other acquaintances. Victims should be assured that they are never to blame for the harmful behaviour of others. No matter who abuses them, a victim is not guilty.
Yeah. Now, would you stand by that sentiment, Sarah?
I would 100% stand by that sentiment.
And particularly the idea about most victims being abused by people they know, because we've talked about that a lot, right?
Yeah, the vast majority abused by people they know. Abuses can be anybody, and that's what we need to wake up to. Abuses can be anybody, and no victim is ever responsible for abuse. It doesn't matter if they had gone out and got drunk, stripped naked, climbed into bed next to somebody and started masturbating them, and that person turns out to have sex with them. They are not responsible. If they are a child or a vulnerable adult or in a vulnerable situation, they are never responsible.
See, there's a man who would disagree with you,
yes,
unfortunately.
I know.
And what's worse than that is he's actually linked in the church's Safeguarding Protecting Children and Youth page for the UK. So if we go to videos and talks, right here, third one along, who recognises this chap? Right next to Patrick Kieran, who gave an excellent talk about abuse. Really good. And he said many of these sentiments here about how it is never your fault. Rich G. Scott had a different take. We're not going to play it now because I frankly don't want to give airtime to his take. But he basically encouraged victims to look for what level of responsibility they should take for the abuse that incurred, and they should reflect upon that prayerfully with a church leader. And the fact that they have in this said that most victims are abused by people they know, and that victims should be assured that they're never to blame for the harmful behaviour of others. Two very good points, very almost groundbreaking points for the church to make. The church, in the first instance, is recognising that this church family scenario is actually what makes people vulnerable to abuse. We're seeing that now. And we're also recognising that victims are not guilty and that they're not responsible, they're never to blame. How can they still link to Richard G. Scott in their help and resources? Jane?
Do you know, it's just...
Sorry, Jane, and then Sarah.
Can I just to give you guys a bit of context about what happened? So on Wednesday, Sarah and I were having a conversation, and Sarah had just so happened to mention that she felt it was really important that something we could do as 21st century saints was to contact church leaders and ask, could you please put a disclaimer on this talk? It's happened in an Ensign article, and if there's a talk where that can happen, this is the one to do it. And we had a conversation about how, hasn't that been done already? I mean, absolutely, because this is a really, really harmful talk. We spent a long time discussing this, and a matter of hours later, we went on to the Safeguarding website again, just sort of familiarising ourselves with it. And so it was our real prayer that no one was going to notice this, because the potential for a victim or a well-meaning church leader to think that this is the helpful resource they're being told it is strikes utter terror into our hearts. So we were awake all night on Wednesday night. We contacted church leaders. We have alerted them to it. We have pleaded and begged them. We've brought it to their attention, and it's our hope and prayer. Actually, I feel confident that the church will realise that this is problematic. So I do want to say that, but I need it that needs to happen urgently, and I'm really praying that they'll do something about that with immediate effect.
In the spirit of spelling things out for the church, take that talk off that page, please.
Absolutely. And I had a victim actually say to me on Friday evening about the words that were spoken in this talk, where the words were saying, maybe when the abuse started, there was nothing you could do because you were too scared, etc., etc. But as time went on, there may have been opportunities when you could have taken steps to stop the abuse, and you need to talk to the bishop to assess your level of responsibility. I had a victim, an adult man, absolutely sit there and look at me and say, that is so triggering. Years and years after I thought I dealt with abuse, hearing those words is so triggering, because that was what I blamed myself for, not stopping it. So absolutely get this talk off there. Don't let the good work you've done, church. You've done some amazing work, and we're so pleased that you've done some amazing work on safeguarding in a relatively short space of time. Don't let this talk ruin it. This talk does not represent you as a church. Not now. Get rid of it.
I think it's also important just to jump in for a second, just to say it's actually very reflective of what I think is happening with the training. Someone's being asked, can you write a document, or can we get our heads together? What is it we need? Let's get it up on the website. That hasn't properly been looked at. No victim was part of compiling those talks. Now, there are 12 talks there, given with authority. None of them are women. Those talks are not recent. If you think that good safeguarding training and preparation is to Google the keywords of abuse and conference talks and stick up or use whatever has been presented there, please, that is not how we teach these days. That is not how we're supposed to be learning. That is the definition of lazy learning. But when it comes to safeguarding, you have got to take extra precautions. You have got to know what the hell you're talking about. And whoever did that really needed to be guided in a much more effective way. Can we please have a safeguarding committee, which we now understand has been disbanded? Can we please see it continue, and they can together look at this and make these types of decisions with the input that needs to inform those decisions?
I'm disappointed we told the church on Wednesday how important it was to remove this talk and that it's still there. I really am hopeful that we wake up tomorrow morning and it's gone.
Yeah, because what the problem we have at the moment is that you've got this next slide where it says stake presidencies and bishops should ensure that what they say about abuse is based on church doctrine. Okay, so they're now going to go to that resource and think that, okay, well, this is a leader of the church. We believe in an open canon of scripture. So therefore, I'm listening to Richard G. Scott. Now, what they have done, to their credit, and this shows the disjointed nature of things, is that hyperlink there, abuse, help, healing, and protection, leads to a website where at the bottom, under other resources, there are several conference talks. Gordon B. Hinckley, personal worthiness to exercise the priesthood. Gordon B. Hinckley, what are people asking about us? Dallin H. Oaks, fine. But then it's got Richard G. Scott. It's got his second talk from 2008. So they learnt not to put the slightly older and slightly more offensive one on, but his 2008 talk wasn't much better.
And we did bring to the church's attention, it was both talks we were concerned about. We are concerned about, and actually, if you comb through all of those talks, most of them have got problematic content as it comes to abuse. So to perhaps even use sections for them, or do you know this is actually what I was ranting to Sarah about the other night. We have a prophet. We have 12 people who are there to serve in that capacity. We have area leadership. We have people who are in positions where this is their full-time job, and issuing a new document, a new conference talk, a new immediately. Can you give us some revelation or guidance about what that needs to look like right now? Forget the stuff that's happened historically. You can do that right now. You can. There are people who will be happy to do it. Ask them.
Yeah. I mean, well, surely they could turn around and write a talk specifically for this website and about the UK changes. Surely.
Yeah, well,
maybe you should do that, Nemo.
Maybe they'll let me. But you've got here that in stake and ward council meetings, stake presidencies and bishops, at least annually, regularly, review church policies and guidelines on preventing and responding to abuse. Good. Yes, keep reviewing them. And the first thing you should do is not have Richard G. Scott involved in any of the resources that you're giving to people. But they teach key messages on abuse, the key messages in the abuse section of Life Help in the Gospel library, which we can check out. Members of stake and ward councils should then discuss this material in their respective presidency leadership meetings with others as needed.
The other thing is, though, Nemo, they're saying review regularly, and we've all been a bit excited about, oh, good, they're going to review this annually. But review doesn't mean they're going to have any power or control to say this is a load of rubbish, let's get rid of it. Because that would be
not
review.
Necessarily.
They're just going to actually look at it and tell themselves what it says again, aren't they?
Yes. So what that means really is, they should remind themselves.
Yeah.
Rather than review. Can we go to the slide that deals with your new calling, Sarah?
Oh, yeah.
It's very exciting. Stake safeguarding specialists. And this is one of their first... If you don't believe that the Richard G. Scott talk was a major faux pas, this is another... I wouldn't say first because that is a big one. But this is another faux pas. This is another swing and a miss from the church with this slide. Because stake safeguarding specialists, of which Sarah is the first in the UK... they say that the stake presidency may determine to call a stake safeguarding specialist either as a stake welfare or self-reliance specialist, a stake communication specialist, or an other stake calling, general handbook, whatever. The stake safeguarding specialist may also be a high counselor dedicated to this assignment. So just before we go to you, Sarah, I'm hoping that what they mean in that first paragraph is that they will call them through the framework and paradigm of an other stake calling, meaning that that's how they'll deal with it in terms of whether to send a high counselor or a member of the state presidency and where to do the sustainings. Hopefully that's all just administrative and they're not trying to undermine this calling by giving it a different title. Ruth, because Sarah, once you get going, I want you to really go for this. So, Ruth?
I have a problem with the word may. The state presidency may determine to call a state safeguarding specialist. This should be a must. The state presidency must call a state safeguarding specialist. The state presidency will call a state safeguarding specialist. End of. That is a new role that is needed, necessary, and is part of the accountability that this process demands. So the fact that they are already allowing themselves an opportunity to, maybe we will, maybe we won't, maybe we'll just ask one of the high counsellors to do it on assignment. What do you value this process or do you not? Do you think this is important to safeguard or do you not? Because that whole slide says to me, you're not taking this seriously.
Whereas it's something that should definitely be happening. Sarah?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the concern I've got, if they're going to call a high counsellor, that is going to be a man, isn't it? And I'm really hoping they're going to call women for this role, because that's in evidence of all the research, all the findings, that safeguarding specialists in faith communities should be women, because it helps redress in some way the imbalance of power. But we're not 100% hopeful of that. We can just hope and pray that's what they do. So I hope it's not tagged on to a high counsellor's other duties and other responsibilities, because it minimises it. And the other
this needs to be someone who can spend all their time doing this. This needs to be a dedicated calling.
Yeah, it absolutely does need to be. And I don't understand the bit about they may be a stake welfare specialist or a stake self-reliance. Let me tell you now, I'm not a stake welfare specialist and I'm not a stake reliance, whatever it is, specialist. I'm safeguarding. And I'm not involved in those other things. Yeah. So there's a real need to keep an eye on how this role develops, because some state presidents will be fantastic at working with their safeguarding specialists and will really want to get a good person in post and work with them. Others are going to see it as just something they have to do, stick it on somebody else's already busy plate to handle and not take it seriously at all.
And we talked in the episode where I came on your podcast, where we talked about how the church is reluctant to give proper training to this role. They're going to give it to family services, and then they're going to train the safeguarding specialists. In reality, this needs to be a calling where they're given direct training. But the problem is, like I've said before, that undermines the lay nature of the church in giving someone professional qualifications, and it, especially if it's a woman, creates a massive problem with this patriarchal priesthood idea, because she'd actually be more qualified than a man. Jane, I can see the rage.
Could you
bring the rage?
Oh, thank you. Yes, could you bring the slide up again then?
Oh, absolutely.
So that I can get my more
rage on. Get your rage on.
Okay. There is a complete lack of clarity. As a bishop, I would have no idea what the hell this person should be doing, where they would fit within the role in my ward as a stake president. I would have no idea who I should call, what their skill set should be. And the fact that actually in this case, what we've recommended and what I believe the Safeguarding Committee were recommending is that a safeguarding specialist shouldn't be one of those callings where whom the Lord calls, he qualifies. What we need are people who are empowered, who ideally have a background where they understand the importance of safeguarding and can effectively advocate and push back when they come up against the barriers that we inevitably come up against when it comes to the abuse of power. So we are going to find situations where typically women are disempowered in speaking up. If it's a Relief Society president, if it is a primary president who's been expressing concerns, we get told time and time again, bishops have got this, we'll bring it to the attention of the person who needs to know, and it goes nowhere. We need people who, safeguarding specialists, who are able to say, actually, no, I need to be in that meeting and you need to keep me informed, and we need to make these decisions about how to risk assess an individual together. Now what we need to do is satisfy the safeguarding specialist that risk has been minimized. So the safeguarding specialist should be a really integral part. We need smart people. We need strong people. It would be wonderful if those people were not members of the church. It would be wonderful if they had left the church, because you're then sort of not part of that potential hierarchy, people who can actually feel confident and empowered in making decisions. Now, the other really, as Sarah's already alluded to it, the stake safeguarding specialist may also be a high counsellor. Please don't do that. Please don't call your high counsellors to this position unless there is a special reason to do so. These safeguarding specialists should ideally be women, and they should have expertise in this area.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I'm going to throw myself up on screen at the moment and say that if you can't tell by now, this isn't exactly what we would have hoped for when we saw that letter and the things we were promised in that letter. And so what we're going to do now is keep up the pressure to make sure that the church can't just say, oh yes, well, we're introducing background checks, so therefore it's all fine now. We've got to get into the details and the meat of this and sort that out. If you want to support that, you can hit subscribe, don't you know? Or you can like the video, that's awesome. And if you love this work, you could become a monthly donor and support us, because certainly this is my job. It's what I do full time, and I wouldn't do anything else, because these changes, getting to be peripheral to this and involved in this, has been wonderful, and I wouldn't change it for the world. But I need your support, so support in whatever way you can. And now I want to clear up some of Ruth's confusion, or the confusion that she proffered on behalf of a stake president or a bishop, by showing this slide. Which is the role of stake safeguarding specialist. Sarah, I've got you to do a lot of reading tonight, but could you please read the role that you have been called to?
Well, yeah. The role of safeguarding specialist includes ensure the regular review of church policies and guidelines on preventing and responding to abuse is undertaken in stake and ward councils, within organisation presidencies and leadership meetings, and with others as needed. Supporting and monitoring to ensure quality safeguarding training in stake and ward meetings, including providing instruction as required. Ensuring DBS checking is complete and current before a member begins any assignment or calling with work with children or youth. Ensuring that all adults who work with children and youth have completed the Protecting Children and Youth online training within 1 month of being called, and then repeat the training every 3 years. Assisting with an annual safeguarding audit. Training church leaders to promptly call the abuse helpline about every situation in which a person has been abused, is at risk of being abused, or if the church leader becomes aware of a member viewing, purchasing or distributing child pornography. Do you want me to rant now, or in a more structured way?
I mean, I would just like to rant about point 6. You absolutely shouldn't be training them to promptly call the abuse helpline before they call the police. If they become aware that a member is viewing, purchasing or distributing child pornography, the first thing they should do is get their phone out and call 111 or even 999 if necessary. Or is it 101?
100%.
101, sorry.
Absolutely. They call the police, they call their local children's services safeguarding team, they call the NSPCC helpline. They do not and should not call the church abuse helpline. The only time they should call the church abuse helpline is when they have called and alerted the appropriate authorities, and they then notify the helpline as to what they have done. And they say to the helpline, this is what I've done, this is the advice I've been given, this is what I now have to do.
Because they knew what to do, because the stake safeguarding specialist taught them what to do.
Right. And that's the thing. Safeguarding specialists have absolutely got to be out there saying that's the way around you do it. You call the civil authorities first. You make note of what the civil authorities tell you. You record that information and you share that with the abuse helpline lawyer. You do not do the abuse helpline first.
No.
That is absolute, and there's a lot to be said about that later. The other bit is ensuring the regular review of policies and guidelines. Well, the safeguarding specialists have got to be able to make critical analysis of those policies and procedures and be able to talk about where they're effective, where they're not effective, how they can be improved, how they can be better understood and better disseminated.
Yeah.
And the DBS checking, well, there's an all, which is that's a huge issue. Should we do that later?
Yeah, we'll do that later.
And this bit, number 4, what is the point of any training program that can be done a month after you've started the job? Well, it's a nonsense. It's an utter nonsense. It's like if I go and apply for a job doing whatever tomorrow and they say, yeah, come in, work for a month, and then we'll tell you how to do your job. What does nobody see the stupidity in that? It doesn't make any sense at all. Do the job for a month, and when you've been doing it for a month, we'll tell you how you should do it.
And then Richard points to some further confusion. We'll talk about calling civil authorities first later, so we will come to that. But this entire document seems a little bit confused. It's almost like they've taken the existing bits and then just thrown the new bits in. Yeah. That's my suspicion, is that the person that put this together, who I won't name, but you can find in the file data, and it wasn't a member of the area presidency, I'll just put it that way. It was, so it's like they've taken all the church's current stuff from the handbook and everything, and then just kind of thrown in the new stuff and not taken. They've not taken thought for how the old approach now conflicts with the new approach, because this is still the old approach. Call the abuse helpline. Call the abuse helpline. But that's not the way it should be. Go on, Ruth.
Can I just raise the point that the only people that have the ability, I could pick up the phone, I can dial that number, they will hang up on me. Because the only people that the abuse helpline is for is the bishop or the stake president. So training church leaders would make you feel, if you were sat in this presentation, make you think, oh, well, I'm the Relief Society president, or I'm the primary president, or I'm the teacher in that Sunday school class. That's what I have to do. No. The only people that abuse helpline is ever for is the bishop or the stake president. And it purely is there to cover the church's legal obligations to understand what's going on in their chapel and under their jurisdiction. And that is not any part of safeguarding people. Your responsibility as the class teacher, as somebody in the corridor who noticed something a little bit odd, is to call the civil authorities. And we'll go on to that in the document. It doesn't cover that. It does cover that, fortunately. So this is where this Frankensteining leads to the misunderstanding that maybe if you see yourself as a leader at church, the Relief Society president, primary president, you would think that was your first port of call. It isn't. You are an ordinary member. And everybody is an ordinary volunteer member in our chapels, including the bishop and stake president. So even them should be going down the route of civil authorities first, get the right people in place to actually help the person being abused. And then if you are that bishop or the stake president and you want to call the abuse helpline, it warrants it.
Call the good old boys helpline.
Go knock yourself out.
And in fact, this helpline, which we have to talk about later, but what the church really need is a couple of helplines. What they really need is one that has safeguarding experts on the end of it, who can help support victim care, managing risk, understanding harm, understanding how to make the situation as safe as possible, ensuring victims get the care they need, and then a completely separate discussion with a completely separate helpline to talk about, is there anything the church could have done to have prevented this? What should we have had in place? How do we review what's happened and find out what lessons we can learn from the abuse that has taken place? How did that happen on our watch in our church? What do we do about it? And how do we try and make that safer in future? So they need to actually have different things in place.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're starting to recognise the roles outside the bishops, I guess, with the role of family
Yeah.
services. And I've already touched on this, the fact that family services are the ones that are going to be getting the actual training, that are then disseminating it to the stake safeguarding specialists, because these are paid professionals, and the church can, do that for paid professionals, but they can't possibly actually qualify and empower lay members, because that wouldn't be right, apparently. So the role of family services: victims of sexual abuse, rape, or other forms of sexual assault often suffer serious trauma. When they confide in a bishop or stake president, he responds with heartfelt compassion and empathy. Good. He provides spiritual counselling and support to help victims overcome the destructive effects of abuse. Spiritually destructive effects of abuse, that should clarify. He also calls the Church Abuse Helpline, oh goodness, for guidance. Yes, maybe he might wish to, after he's called the relevant appropriate authorities. In addition to receiving the inspired help of church leaders, victims, offenders, and their families may need professional counselling. Scratch the may, they will need professional counselling. Jane?
Yeah, if you could keep the slide up there.
Yeah, will do. Yep.
Okay. One of the problems in the training is that we are speaking about victims and abusers in the same sorts of ways. In this same paragraph, when we say when someone confides in a bishop, is also very different to when someone discloses abuse for the first time to a bishop. That has to be so carefully controlled and managed, and then what happens next. Someone like Sarah can explain exactly what you need to do, exactly what actually, even in the comments, Richard Heath, we've got, if you're a teacher, you know exactly what to do the moment someone discloses. There is information out there. Our bishops are not trained that way. So when you're in a position as a bishop where you are providing spiritual counselling, that bumps up very, very closely with that sort of psychological, emotional, or all of those things that you're at such a vulnerable time. And even well-meaning spiritual counselling, it just has to be very, very good. So bishops, would be wonderful if you were more formally trained. Again, we're seeing this kind of overlap in roles that are bumping up against each other, and that are not really being as carefully managed as we would like to see them.
And a lay ministry doesn't have to mean a badly trained one. There's this idea that we have to have, because everyone's just mucking in and getting along, that no one could just go, because you've been called as a bishop, you could just go on a training course. You could be put through some level 3 training. You could receive some good training on how to deal with people that come to you in a vulnerable situation. I also think it's important to note, just before we move on to the next slide, the picture that they've chose to pair with this. Is that a male priesthood leader comforting a young girl? No. There's some confused imagery throughout this that you're showing here, like this nice image of someone, giving someone emotional support, but that doesn't link actually to the church leaders, the professional counsellors, because they wouldn't necessarily put themselves in that position, or the priesthood leaders. So there's a lot of confused signals in this. Do you get what I'm saying?
And I think that's actually a really important point, because the images around this, actually, there's a couple of really, really good ones that are used in the PowerPoint, but we have this. It happens with all sorts of situations in vulnerable groups. If you Google images around any situation, you're going to see these sort of trope-like situations where you have a victim with their head down, looking very sad, with the person supportively counselling, and they're both engaging in a situation there, when actually what tends to happen is you find, there are kids who are just completely shut down, kids who don't want to disclose, kids who are pushing you away. People, as you know, by the time you even get through to adulthood, who may choose not to engage with professional counselling for all sorts of different types of reasons. So when we are not being trained in what it needs to look like, and the variety of ways that people can respond to that, we are really missing a very important part of the picture.
We really are. And Sarah will say this far better than me. My experience was working in a primary school many years ago now, but we had we had safeguarding training on a regular basis, because sometimes kids would inadvertently disclose things, and it was very, very important. They weren't confiding in me. They were just telling me offhand about that they had to eat breakfast in the car this morning because Daddy hit Mummy last night and she had a nosebleed and they had to sleep in the car. And then we go on to tell me about the cat, and then we go on to tell me about something else. And I would have to be very quickly making notes, putting my signature on things, and getting that not leading the conversation, not going, oh no, that's awful. I had to have lots of training so that when that disclosure came, that inadvertent disclosure came, I knew how to take the right sort of information down that could be relayed on, married up with other information that other organisations might already be aware of, and the right support and help could go in for that family, that child, that parent, the whole structure around it, because that child would shut down if somebody responded with a huge amount of compassion and started hugging them. There's a very strange man's hand on that girl's knee, which I'm not enjoying. Do you know what I mean? There's a huge amount of stuff that a bishop, who his day job might be working in an office, he might be a plumber, he might be a car mechanic, he won't necessarily understand the complexity of that information. Neither might not the primary teachers, neither might not the Sunday school teachers. And they really need to, in order for that inadvertent disclosure to be taken seriously and it to be given the right weight and reach the right ears in a timely way, so that abuse is nipped in the bud as early as possible.
Absolutely. I remember times from work where you start to piece two and two together about what a child's telling you, and you just want to pick them up and run and just put them somewhere safe and just get them out of the situation, but you can't. And it doesn't work like that. And actually the good natured reaction of many people would be to try and get that child out of danger, but it's not that simple. Anyway, we won't go down that rabbit hole, but it's very important that these people are trained. Absolutely. So the next slide tells us a little bit more about family services, and it basically explains what their role is. They provide professional consultation to church leaders to help them understand social and emotional needs and challenges of their members. They're a resource service. Here's the key bit. Specially trained family service advisors accredited to a high level of safeguarding training. I'm not sure whether level 3 is particularly high level. They'll provide training and support to stake safeguarding specialists, and when invited as a secondary resource, may attend stake meetings to assist with safeguarding training in the stake. And again, I don't want to go into this particularly. I just want to say, why don't you give this directly to stake safeguarding specialists? Why? Again, we've discussed why. It's to do with all sorts of power dynamic reasons and problematic reasons with this whole idea of lay ministry. But the church could just give this training directly to people like Sarah, not that she needs it, but other people that would need it when they're called as a stake safeguarding specialist. That they would need that training. Go on. Sorry, what were you saying?
We should. I think all the safeguarding specialists should absolutely have that training. Absolutely, 100%. We need it, and it should be fundamental. And
we talked about in the last podcast
we've got
about
to roll it out. The problem is with family services training safeguarding specialists, then we train the stake leaders and bishoprics and ward leaders. The problem we've got is each training is going to get diluted each time. You're not going to get the same messages given by the time it's gone through one level, and then
you're going to get a Chinese whispers effect.
You are.
So good safeguarding specialists will always avail themselves of training. You know, that you might, Sarah and I just fairly recently availed ourselves of training that was available to us through a completely separate organisation, because we're involved in in organising that event. Of course, we want to, have those discussions and help us address the biases and understand best practice and evolving theories, all of these types of things. We want to be part of those discussions. So everybody should be availing themselves of the training. But I think the confusing thing, if I were sitting in that congregation listening to this training, I would be really confused. So hold on, we've got a safeguarding specialist, but it could be a high counsellor perhaps, or a welfare specialist, but we've now got LDS family service. Who is actually responsible here? And then there's the help, like what am I actually supposed to be doing? So by this point in the presentation, I think we're going to have a lot of confused people.
Yeah.
We need a flow chart. Just heads up to anyone who's watching this, you absolutely need a flow chart. Ruth suggested it earlier in the chat, and I'm going to steal her idea and claim it as my own. But yeah, they absolutely need a flow chart. They need some way of visually representing who all the moving pieces are in this, and clarifying a lot what these moving pieces are. And I'm going to skip over this next slide. I'm going to put it on screen for 30 seconds because it just talks about this stupid training again that needs to be done within 1 month of being called, when in reality you shouldn't set foot near a vulnerable person or a child until you have done this training and been DBS checked in your capacity of your new calling. You just shouldn't. It's only half an hour online training. It's not really any good anyway. It's not going to take you long to do it before you get into your calling. There's no reason anyone should be like, oh, well, you've got a month, because then it just won't get done.
Do you know, I do some exam invigilating in the exam period. Now, bearing in mind that the only thing I'm doing is giving exam papers out, giving out bottles of water, and sitting there with a group of students that are totally silent and not allowed to talk or interact with me. I had to do a day's safeguarding training before I could sit in a room with a group of children that aren't even allowed to communicate with me. Do you know what I mean? Because it was like, well, you're in the room, you might see something, you might hear something. You need to have this training of this information. You know. But
it's okay, because the leaders are going to seek the guidance of the Spirit in determining who to call. And they're also going to consider a member's worthiness. That's all standard stuff. Well, but here's what's interesting. Before a calling is extended, the leader carefully reviews the person's membership record to verify it doesn't include an annotation or formal membership restrictions. This is all from before. This is all, like we're talking about that Frankenstein. This is all existing policy. But then it will say that all adult members working with children, youth, or vulnerable adults must have a DBS check before a calling is extended. Which is interesting. Not before they're sustained, because I get that. You could extend the call, say, right, but this is subject to DBS check. They do the DBS check, then they come back and you say, oh, well, we're not going to move forward with this. That would make sense. The current operating paradigm of the church is not to tell anyone that you've been offered a calling anyway until the sustaining vote goes ahead. So all that would work. But this idea that you're going to say to someone, I need you to do a DBS check. Why? Well, there's a calling, but I need you to do a DBS check first. It just ruins. I think it feels like it's the wrong way around almost, you know. I don't know. I don't know. You would then give the person the opportunity to say, actually, I don't want to be DBS checked. I don't want to do a calling, whatever. I don't know. Does it seem backwards to you guys, or is it just me?
No, I think that's a good point. I hadn't picked up on that. The fact that, you know, the DBS check is done with the person's consent and permission. You know, that they go through the process of having the DBS check done on them, don't they? Certainly that's the case if you go for a job, you say, yeah, go ahead and DBS check me, that's fine, or I've got an active DBS check and DBS in place already. So I think that's interesting that potentially whoever wrote this somehow thought that could be done without the person being aware before the calling's extended. When in reality, you've got to go to them first and say, there's a calling in the offing, we need to run a DBS check. Are you okay with that?
And this is where they're getting confused by information given to them about DBS checks, because, and I may be wrong, but I believe that in some countries you can do a background check on somebody without their consent. Whereas you can't in the UK. You've got to sign a form and say, yes, I agree to this.
So if they're basing this off California or Pennsylvania or wherever they're having to do it in the States currently, it could be that's what's going on. We won't chat too much about this because this is all just thumbs up stuff. A member is not given any calling or assignment with children, youth, or vulnerable adults before the DBS check is completed. Great. Smashing. We'll get into why that may not be great about the DBS check later, but smashing that's the way around it goes. They also obviously will just go over things about the member's worthiness. That's the same as before. And they'll do the training, that silly old training, the same as before. I keep calling it silly. They need to improve it. This is excellent. Again, we're going to look at interviews with members. Leaders should always give the members the option of having someone else present during an interview or meeting. They should give the option. They shouldn't wait for the member to ask for it. They should give the option. That's going to be crucial. When meeting with a member of the opposite sex, a child or a youth, they ensure that a parent or another adult is present. He or she may join the meeting or wait outside the room, depending on the preferences of the member with whom they are meeting. And then Again, this thing about the 1 month of being sustained and doing the training every 3 years thereafter, I don't think that's regularly enough either. If I'm honest, it should be 12 monthly.
Yeah, it should be. It should be every year.
Yeah. Right. And these are just some general guidelines around interacting with children and youth and that other stuff as well. And this is a new one to me, restroom safety. Do you know whether the church had a policy on this before?
It's called a toilet, for crying out loud.
Yeah, that seems very American, doesn't it?
Yes.
Lavatory safety is what I would have preferred to see. Loo safety. Yeah. But you've got adults and interaction with children in youth settings, at least 2 responsible adults. They've emphasized the rule of 2. They've said that parents should take their children to the loo beforehand, and if not, they must be taken by a parent or legal guardian.
Yeah.
Leaders and teachers should not take children into the restroom. We shouldn't have to say it, but we do.
Yeah.
Do not take someone to the toilet that isn't your child.
Yeah.
Just don't do that. And then it talks again about church-sponsored activities. At least 2 adults must be present at all church activities attended by children and youth. Additionally, adults may be needed depending on the size of the group, the skills required for the activity, or other factors. Parents are encouraged to help. This is a problem because those parents are all now going to need to be checked. Right?
Well, they need to get that sorted, don't they?
They will do. And my worry is, because I remember how tricky it was in primary to have that relay race. We met at the State Centre. There was lots of corridors from the primary rooms to get to the Relief Society room, or where they were holding elders quorum, to be able to go grab mum or dad to say, can you take 3-year-old to the loo? So that is, you needed to have the whole of the primary presidency almost hovering in the corridors between classrooms to be the runners for the teachers who would say, so-and-so needs a wee, can you go get mum? Or so-and-so needs a wee, go get dad. And then we would scurry off to go grab someone. The church is vastly understaffed since I left. So how on earth they make the logistics of that work? And my worry is that people will pay lip service to this. And then when something goes wrong, because things always go wrong eventually, the church will throw this at them like a ton of bricks and say, we told you not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you are liable for this, not us.
And we all know that children aren't exactly, particularly our kind of 3 and 4-year-olds, are not exactly going to wait around for 10 minutes while somebody goes and finds mum or dad or grandma to take them to the toilet.
Yeah, so it gets really quite tricky to actually make that reality when we have the structure of church as it is at the moment. So,
but it's important that it's there, and it's important it's adhered to.
Yeah,
but it's logistically it's a nightmare. Ruth is so spot on with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the parent thing, I find that a bit wishy-washy. Again, I worry that they'll pay lip service to it and kind of say, well, if we've got parents there, we don't need to DBS check them because they're mum and dad. So we'll just have a ton of additional adults here, and actually,
but they're not mum and dad to everyone else's kids.
Exactly, and that's the danger, because then that extra adult, that's someone's big brother, that's someone's big sister, that's someone's mum, someone's dad, someone's uncle, suddenly becomes a safe adult in the eyes of everybody, and they're not. They've not been DBS checked. They are here. And by inference, we see them as a safe person and a person in authority, as a child would, but they're not. So there's all ways that this could actually give the appearance of we're being more safe, and actually we've got to nip these sorts of things in the bud.
Yeah, I think Mary S. Curry makes a really good point here, that checking for current DBS check before giving calling is going to come into force further down the line once the majority of people have had one done. Yeah. And that's, I think, what that other slide was actually trying to get at. Is that way round? It should be that they check that they've already got a DBS check, and if they haven't, they get them to get one after they've spoken to them about the calling. I think would be the appropriate way. Now let's talk about possibly the most controversial part of this entire presentation. Thank you to everyone that stuck with us so far. How are they going to get through this? I'm a cruel and on it taskmaster when it comes to getting through these slides. I'm cutting people off left, right, and centre, and we're an hour in, and we're getting there. There's no way this is all going to get done in a 5th Sunday. No way. Because just the amount of questions this presentation elicits because of its lack of clarity, and it's only going to get worse on this slide here. But Jane, you have a lovely Scottish accent and I don't. So could you read this, please?
I should really model boundaries and how to say no to assignments in church, but I
Go on
won't.
then.
Reporting abuse. When abuse occurs, the first and immediate responsibility of church leaders is to help those who have been abused and to protect vulnerable persons from future abuse. Leaders should not encourage a person to remain in a home or situation that is abusive or unsafe. All members, especially parents and leaders, are encouraged to be alert and diligent and do all they can to protect children and others against abuse. If members become aware of instances of abuse, they report it to civil authorities and counsel with the bishop. No church leader should ever dismiss a report of abuse or counsel a member not to report criminal activity. No notes.
That is excellent. And they could have just left it there. They should have just left it there.
They should have
Right?
just left it there. Just leave it. Don't do anything else. Just do this.
leave it.
Don't
Because
bother
this-
with anything.
This in crisis page that they reference is actually something I think more members of the church need to know. And to the church's credit, it's a good looking page. I haven't had a chance to look through it in detail, but by the looks of it, it's just got the US and Canada Child Help National Abuse Child Abuse Hotline. It's got Child Protective Services. It's got lots of free phone services. It's all US based. Then there's online resources. So they could do with something that's a bit more, country specific. But still, the fact that the church has that is an admission that there are outside agencies who can help with this stuff, and that's what we need them to be understanding.
That is the only slide we need.
This is the only slide we need. So should we look at the next one?
Oh God, do we have to?
Yes.
Oh yeah,
The
no, this is
NSPCC.
good.
This is also good. Ruth, I feel bad because I haven't asked you to read anything yet. Would you like to read this, please?
The National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, NSPCC, says, whether you want to report child abuse and neglect or aren't sure what to do, we're here to listen, offer advice and support, and can take the next steps if a child's in danger. And our helpline team are here to support you in a stress-free, comfortable way. Finding out what happens when you get in touch can help put your mind at ease about the process. The following links contain helpful information about reporting. I think that's really, really, really important that they've included the NSPCC. It's relevant to the UK, and I've had called to call them myself before, and they are very helpful, and they actually understand this, and they don't care about what you believe or don't believe, and they don't care about your spiritual health. They are just there to deal with our children being abused. And I'm sure if you rang them because you weren't sure about what to do about someone who wasn't a child that was being abused, they would signpost you to other help that is out there, because they must deal with child abuse. It's often a family pattern, and they would know of other support that is out there. I just want to circle back to that bit that says if members become aware of instances of abuse.
Yes, yeah.
Can I just say to anyone listening who is an active member of the church, I don't care what your calling is, that is speaking to you. You're a member of the church, whether you are the person who gives out the hymn books or you're serving as the stake president, you are a member of the church first before your calling. So that is you. You report it to civil authorities and then tell the bishop, the stake president, whoever, and they can call the abuse helpline. That
bishop or stake president, according to this, should never dismiss a report of abuse or counsel you not to report that criminal activity. And that's very carefully worded, and you could get into the weeds about, they've specified that it's criminal activity, and that how they haven't actually pointed out that they've said that they should never discourage a member, but it's not said that those bishops should report it themselves. And I think that's an interesting thing to go on, but we won't dive into that. But I think it's very important that then we come to this. I was shocked when I saw that they'd included the NSPCC.
Love it.
Genuinely shocked that they'd done it. But a bit disappointed that the next slide starts to conflate a word that by this point in the presentation most people are going to be quite confused about, which is the word helpline. So they've heard about a couple of helplines now, and they say here bishops and stake presidents should promptly call the helpline. Well, the last helpline they were talking about was the NSPCC one. So are they saying that they should call the NSPCC helpline? Well, no, because that number right there that you see on screen will get you through to a church lawyer. That is the church's helpline. And I don't think they're necessarily deliberately conflating these. I certainly hope they aren't. And they should change that to clarify this. Then But in this context here, this now makes more sense. You've got members, including the bishop themselves. Their first priority is to call the civil authorities. Then, if it's a member, they counsel with the bishop and the bishop calls the helpline. Or if it's the bishop themselves, they then call the helpline and inform the helpline of what has been done. And ensure that they let them know that there's a suspected offender attending church meetings, etc., and ensuring their legal requirements are met. That's fine, because they may have missed something. But their number one priority, according to this training, because it applies to all members of the church, as Ruth rightly said, is to call the civil authorities. Am I wrong?
Absolutely right.
Okay,
No.
let's make
Your
that
calling
clear.
will come and go. We're a lay ministry at church. We pride ourselves on that, don't we? That the ordinary members don't get paid, and their callings will change. And one day they might be teaching in primary, and the next day they might be the stake president. So your callings will come and go, but you will always be a member of the church. So the member bit comes first.
Yes.
And it's so important. And from a point of view of, if ever you were going to be having to go to court to answer to your part in an abuse situation, you want to be pretty sure you did it the right thing promptly, because heaven help you bishops, heaven help you stake presidents, if you trust somebody else's opinion to sit on your laurels, and that then becomes a case like the ones that have happened in America, the ones that have happened in other parts of the world, which the church having to pay out millions aside to know the Arizona case that a child was being raped for 7 years of their life from 6 weeks old. I don't think I could live with myself if I were that bishop and knowing that I sat on that information because somebody told me you don't need to tell anybody else. So as a member of the church, if you believe in the Saviour, if you believe in just being a decent human being on this planet, just call the right people first.
And there is a place for the helpline. I've just been thinking about this, and I just want to say this before we move to the next slide. There is a place for this, whereby you've reported it to police, you've become aware that so and so who is in the building is committed an act of abuse or whatever, and you call the police and you report it and it's all sorted, and then you call the helpline and say, I don't know what to do now as their bishop. I don't know whether I should release them. I don't know whether to encourage the family not to attend this ward and attend another ward. That's what that helpline's for.
Yes.
That's what is my ecclesiastical duty now. We've done all the legal stuff and we've got them the help they need. We've got the appropriate authorities involved. How do I manage this from a church perspective? If that's what this helpline should be for, to my mind. This is for bishops and stake presidents to know who to release or not release, when to encourage people to attend a different ward, or what the appropriate action is, and that should again be informed by good safeguarding training and good policy. But that, to my mind, that seems to be where this should fit into the pattern. Jane?
That would also require, I think, not reform, but perhaps, I would love to see reform of the church safeguarding helpline. I don't think there's a place for it in its current form. That said, we have had an instance where, was it just last year, we had a member of the Brit Vengers who had shared a call made to the church safeguarding helpline as a serving bishop, and the advice, while it was kind, well-meaning, it was a pleasant experience for the people involved. There were no red flags. The whole thing in its entirety was a huge red flag, because people were not going to be continued to be safe. So it would require really looking at the church helpline, and if it needs to serve that purpose, to be trained in serving that purpose, or to be called and set apart to serve that purpose. At the moment, where there is a payment happening, there's just a bit of a conflict of interest then if the payment is involving giving ecclesiastical advice. Because if it is indeed going to stay the way it currently is, that you are providing a service for the church and the church is your client, and we want to make sure that everybody's making legal requirements, that makes sense. I don't think it's good. I don't think it works. I think it's actually in a lot of ways dangerous. But yeah.
Agreed. Okay, we're almost there, folks. We're almost there. It's a warm evening here in the UK, and we're suffering through this for you all, so you can see, and so that if there's any members watching this, you come armed to this fifth Sunday, being like, you know what, this is what. If they haven't reformed it by then, you can go and I'll rant about this at the end, I'm sure, but you can go in and say, this isn't right about this presentation. Have you thought about this? And throw your hand up. Let's talk about caring for victims, offenders, and families. And this is just some very general guidance. We won't get too into this because it's kind of already been said. They talk about victims of abuse often suffer serious trauma. State presidents and bishops respond with heartfelt compassion and empathy. They provide spiritual counselling and support to help victims overcome the destructive effects of abuse. Sometimes victims have feelings of guilt or shame. Victims are not guilty of sin. Leaders help them and their families understand God's love and the healing that comes through Jesus Christ and his atonement. Up yours, Richard G. Scott. I don't get why they've included him in this process, because all of this is giving the right signals that victims are not guilty of any sin, and that this is good ecclesiastical counselling here.
Bishops and any church leaders should feel free to say and repeat that phrase every single time that someone approaches them to disclose abuse. You are not to blame.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You are not guilty of sin. There is no
and it has to
confession
be
needed
said
here.
very, very, very clearly over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm. And there are, I can imagine in my head several bishops that I know personally who will say that. Several state presidents who will say that. They will say that because that is what they believe. The church has moved on from the Richard G. Scott era. And so, in the words of our beloved Alan Haney from the last General Conference, the words of past prophets don't age like vintage comic books or classic cars. And I agree, because Richard G. Scott's talk is a clapped out MGB that's just rusting away in someone's garage, and it should be consigned. It has lost its value.
Nemo, I know I'm being perhaps unfair.
Monday morning, it'll be gone.
All right. Jane?
I know I'm being perhaps unfair when it is working,
No,
but we have heard far too many stories. If you're getting it right, awesome, no notes. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, abuse isn't always presented with a big bow that says this is abuse, I am being abused. Often a bishop is presented with a situation that he does not recognize as abuse. We have had so many people call us because it hasn't been made clear, because we don't have a language of a young woman to say, I was raped. She hasn't been aware that it was rape. She hasn't been aware that it's even happened. It's presented to children at times as play, when someone doesn't know in the moment, doesn't recognize that they're being groomed, and parents are part of that process. So when a child is approaching a bishop and saying, I feel really bad because someone sent me explicit images, a young man from another state across the world, and the bishop's going down a road of speaking about repentance, the young woman has been exposed to an online sexual assault, and those things are not okay. And so this is why I'm saying that these trainings don't offer the opportunity for us to really understand the nature of either abuse or abusers or how it works.
No, thank you, Jane, as always, for putting me right when I try to give too much credit too quickly. No, it's got to be said. We're here to say these difficult things because we've been raised our entire lives not to. And I still fall into those patterns sometimes. It happens. You fall into that pattern of like, let's just give people a break. No, this is too serious and too important to drop our guard. So thank you for that. Let's try hard if we can to look really quickly at the way they say to help offenders, because we haven't looked much at offenders tonight and how they are sort of helped, and how they can, in theory, exist within our community still, because it's such a minefield. But I guess it's difficult, but these people exist within our communities outside of church, and there are ways and means whereby they can exist in our society outside of church. They're not allowed to live within so many miles of a school or whatever, and their neighbours have to be notified or whatever it is, but these people are still people, and they do still exist within our societies. So I would really like to get Sarah's opinion on this as to how the church is approaching offenders here, because I feel like you've got some professional experience with that. So could you read this slide for me and tell me what you think?
Stake presidents and bishops should help those who have committed abuse to repent and to cease their abusive behaviour. If an adult has committed a sexual sin against a child, the behaviour may be very difficult to change. The process of repentance may be very prolonged. Section 32 of the General Handbook is organised to guide leaders through the key decisions and actions necessary to help someone repent of a serious sin and to help protect others. Stake presidents and bishops should ensure they follow the procedures regarding annotations, including following the instructions in the annotation. The person subject to annotation must not be given any calling or assignment involving children or youth. This includes not being given a ministering assignment to any family with youth or children in the home. It also includes not having a youth as a ministering companion.
We've already covered the problems with the youth as ministering companions anyway, so we won't go there, but go for it, Sarah.
What the church have absolutely got to do, if they want to manage and include offenders safely within the church, the first thing they have to do is liaise with external authorities, probation officers, police sex offender managers, social workers, and have a wide discussion about what are the risks, how do we know if risk is escalating, what are the signs we should look out for, and what do we need to put in place in order to manage this risk in a way that is going to protect and be safe. They must never, ever have an abuser in the same ward as the victim. Never. There's just no justification for that. And they shouldn't even be in the same stake, really, because the likelihood of mixing up photographs, all that kind of unintentional contact is just going to be so risky, isn't it? They can't manage risk unless they've got information about the person's offending, and they cannot rely upon the offender to tell them the truth about their offending. And I have had this interaction with the church as a professional about managing sexual offenders in the community, to be told, well, he told me he'd only committed 2 offences. And I said, I'm telling you, he's committed 12 offences. Well, I have to believe what he tells me. No, you don't. Stop being an idiot. No, you don't. That conversation didn't go well, I have to say. But the reality is we need to make absolutely sure that there's a wealth of information gathered. There is a safety plan that is implemented all the time and does not include asking a missionary who's 19 years old to sit next to them in sacrament, because that's not a safety plan.
No.
It's not. It's a cop-out. This
is where the DBS check could be useful in conjunction with the annotation system, because you can take what was reported back by the DBS check and put it on the annotation so that it is, everyone is made aware of it. Because we've been asking ourselves this question, haven't we? What is going to be done with the information when it comes back from DBS? Who's making the call as to, is this historic? Is this something that they should still bar them? I think from what I've understood of this presentation, they're saying that they say in the beginning, no one with a history of abuse can work with children or vulnerable adults.
You see, it's a hugely massive area, Nemo. It's massive, because who is going to make that decision about what an offence actually means? Who's deciding if a particular offence is high risk, low risk, or really is something that we don't need to be concerned about at all, or something we should be very concerned about? And that's not a decision that a lawyer or a stake president or a bishop or anybody else is able to make unless they are extremely skilled and aware and understanding around how the DBS information, what it means, what it looks like. If they don't know that, how are they going to make a decision? They need to be. This is
why 31.8 needs to be involved. Really.
Right, and that's what we've been asking for from day one, is that this church partner up with the total transparency that would come from being partners with an external agency like 31.8 or NWG, the National Working Group, or NSPCC, but particularly 31.8 are very, very good around faith communities, and they need to be talking to them. We've had a DBS come back that's got this information on it. Do you think that means that this person should not be allowed to serve in primary, or do you think?
But then
this is.
We've got to give them some discernment, Sarah, because we've essentially admitted through all this that the power of discernment doesn't work, right? So I'm being facetious. Hang on. We've admitted that the power of discernment.
Your Sunday lunch or something.
Power of discernment does not work, because otherwise, if it did, you wouldn't need background checks. But you've got to let the bishops have some sort of feeling of discernment. Oh, well, I get to discern whether this information allows them to serve or not. Otherwise, you're taking a lot of the responsibility for who can or can't be involved in a calling out of the hands of the church's God-given right to do so. Go on.
Well, considering the bishops are still the people that hold the ultimate responsibility for safeguarding, according to the testimony given to, still responsible for what's happening in their wards on safeguarding, because none of this changes that. It's still a matter of public record that bishops are responsible for safeguarding. But it's just back to that whole bit. They need expert skills to be looking. And it needs to be more than one person. It needs to be a few people looking at something together and making a decision on it. This isn't something that is just a yes or no.
So just to clarify, the bishop, if he knows that a DBS check has come back with anything on it, and he chooses to then put them into a position of responsibility, particularly with children and youth, the legality of that, the legal liability will then rest very much with him.
And it's 5 years in prison, right? If he knowingly allows someone who's on the barred list to work with children.
Yeah.
So if they come back with a check of the barred list and they're on it, and he doesn't understand that means they can't work with children, he just thinks, oh, well, it happened a long time ago.
It happened a long time ago. They've repented.
They've repented.
They've gone through this process of repentance.
That's what I wanted to bring up. Yeah.
That's my worry, that these bishops will blindly trust the spiritual structure and guidelines and think that they have the discerning power to say that is in the past and they have repented of it. I'm sorry, that's not how it works back on planet Earth in the UK, which is you will be held legally liable if you have chosen to put somebody into that position again and they're on that barred list. Because you know there's no innocence in that decision.
Yeah, if they're on the barred list, I think the decision becomes probably very easy, because it's an absolute categorically it would be illegal to allow them to work with children or youth. So if they're on the barred list, those are probably the safest, easiest decisions that the church will have to make, because it's a simple yes or no.
Yeah.
The difficulty is going to come if they're not on the barred list, and that can happen for a variety of reasons. The offence might have been so long ago, it was before the barred list legislation existed. The judge might have forgotten to order it and nobody actually stood up in court at the time and said, excuse me, you've forgotten to do this, you need to put that right, or went back into court afterwards to ask for it. And that happens. I've seen it happen. There can be reasons why somebody isn't on the barred list, and it's people that have got convictions or allegations that are not on the barred list that we need to be really thinking about very carefully.
Yeah.
You see, I think what's happened is that this is how the legal side of things with the church is sort of fudging what they know. I'm really not happy with some of the language that's been used around this, because even in the letter around who's entitled to have a check of the barred list, what we're talking about is an enhanced DBS check. And it means it's not just about who can't work with children or youth. It's also about if you have a history of abuse in your family, if you have spouse abuse, if there are any of those types of situations that people need to be aware of historically, a decision will have to be made. So to sort of make it just about the children or youth is obfuscating what we're actually talking about.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, I just want to make super clear that we're not speculating here that the situation as it currently is, because I think sometimes we're speaking a little bit hopefully, like maybe the church will do this, maybe we could look at doing this. What's happening at the moment is the church lawyer in the United Kingdom has been making those decisions. At the moment, the way safeguarding DBS checks are going to be implemented, one single church lawyer is going to be making that decision. Or if he decides to take on any more staff, it will be his company. But this is currently a one-man operation. So if that is one person who's making that decision, which it is, when we say the church will have to decide, what we're saying is he's deciding. So is he going to have a conversation with the bishop? Is he going to have a conversation with the safeguarding specialist? Or is what will happen what effectively currently happens without a DBS check? Because we keep saying this, the church already knows who most of these people are. As current things start to happen and people are calling the helpline, wards are reporting it. Members all know what the histories are there, and still those calls have been extended. So my question is around, who is this single church lawyer going to share the decision-making process with? I am very concerned about it.
There, you got the full screen treatment there, Jane, but thank you very much.
you.
Very well said. We seem to have
I
lost our
felt
stakes,
fancy.
our stakes safeguarding specialist.
She's
but that's
been
fine.
whisked away to the city of Enoch.
To a crisis
She's
situation,
that
sure.
good.
Let's look over families real quick, and then we'll go through the boring audit that Sarah has to do. The stake presidents and bishops should also be caring and sensitive when working with the families of victims and perpetrators of abuse. Guidance for counselling victims and offenders is provided at Abuse How to Help. That's cool. And she's back. In addition to receiving the inspired help of church leaders, victims, offenders, and their families may need professional counselling. Church leaders are not called to be professional counsellors or to provide therapy. Very good, setting some good boundaries there. The assistance they give is spiritual, focusing on the strengthening, comforting, redeeming power of Jesus Christ. Can I just say, this is very good for the church to finally be admitting that they are not a one-stop shop for all people's solutions. And they're finally... No, we deal with people's spiritual aspect of their lives, but we can't actually delve into the other parts. The assistance they give is spiritual. I'm going to say it again. Focusing on strengthening, comforting, redeeming power of Jesus Christ. In addition to this important and inspired help, some members may benefit from professional counselling. Such counselling or therapy can help members understand and respond to life's challenges in healthy ways. If members cannot pay for professional counselling on their own or through insurance, again, this is clearly aimed at Americans, bishops may use fast offerings to assist. Family services are a resource to church leaders assisting victims, offenders, and their families. Guidance is provided at, and that's the Family Services website. Just really quick, Sarah, your thoughts on family services involvement in all this?
I think it's really important that we have got access to family services that are skilled and understand and knowledgeable about abuse. I think we need to, certainly in our stake, there's Relief Society presidents and various people can actually talk to family services about getting counselling in place without people having to go via their bishop. And I think we need to take the bishop being the sole route to family services out of the equation and give that opportunity to other leaders within the church, that people can choose who they want to go and talk to about problems and difficulties, and that leader then can say to the bishop, I recommend that Brother Nemo is given some therapy and counselling, and the bishop will say, yep, that's cool. I don't need to know the details. Here you go. Here's a list of therapists. You sort out who you want to talk to, and let's hope it all goes well for you.
That's cracking.
But I think we do need them. We should have them. And it's actually one of the fabulous things that our church can offer is therapeutic counselling and support and services for people. But we need to make sure that that works well, that people know they have a choice of therapist. The bishops don't get to have a say in it.
And I think it's important as well to realise it doesn't need to be through family services, that the bishop can fund whatever therapy that you feel that is most appropriate for you, and that could be an outside therapist entirely. And what's most important with therapy is that it's done in a timely way. So rather than wait for the NHS to kick in or anything like that, we are a wealthy church. Nobody should be needing to pay for that for themselves. Even if the bishop wants you to go away and figure out whether can they afford to pay for it? No, they can't. The answer is always no, they can't, bishop. You need to fund this. Because this is massive, and it's important that they get it that they take up therapy in a really timely way, and they get the counselling and the support and the help that they need. And I think what a wonderful church to be part of when we know they've got deep enough pockets for that to happen.
There's a really good point here by Robert Anderson. An untrained bishop could well need therapy if untrained and someone goes to them with problems. I think it should be mandatory for bishops to receive therapeutic help and counselling, or for it certainly to be available to them.
When I was working,
their spouses about what they've had.
Exactly.
When I was working, and bearing in mind I was part of a professional team with lots of professionals around me, but when I was working, it was mandatory that we had to go to counselling and psychological assessment every so often,
Yeah.
And if you didn't go, somebody would come saying, you haven't rocked up for therapy for the last couple of months. You're thinking, oh, yeah, okay.
I was once
but
told
that
by a professional
framework
therapist.
already exists, though. Sorry, that does, that you bishops are regularly counselling with their priesthood leadership framework, and at any point, if you've been sort of traumatized as a result of that kind of work, those conversations are happening. Those doors are open. Whereas someone who doesn't know how to access it, the bishop is able to sort of gatekeep that. Relief Society presence can also refer. There's a lot of sort of information we don't know, but it's kind of at the point where someone needs to know how to access it, and it's being made clear how they can do so.
Yeah, I just think that when you learn things about the therapeutic profession, that there's a high rate of suicide amongst therapists and counsellors because they take on people's grief all the time. It's just a moment, I suppose, to stop and pause for these poor untrained bishops who are having all this thrown on them, and maybe to suggest to the church that they could benefit as well. And then they, in turn, will see the benefit of these things and hopefully encourage people that come to them to seek it out themselves, because they can almost be an advocate for it and say, well, I receive therapy for the difficult things I face, and I think it would benefit you too, so I'm going to pay for you to receive some if you would like to. It's, I think all in all, it could be a very positive thing.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit of a jewel in the crown that we've actually got this available via our church.
Thank you. I'm saying I said thank you to you like we were at church, but I was actually thanking someone in the comments who spelt my name wrong. Let's have a look at these final two slides. We're almost there, folks. For the 100 or so of you that have stuck it out with us, we are forever indebted. This is the audit you're going to have to do, Sarah. Aren't you so excited?
I can't wait.
Yeah.
I can't wait.
So each year, a safeguarding audit is conducted, which asks the following 4 questions. Keep it simple. And undertakes the follow-up indicated. 1. Has a stake safeguarding specialist been called in the stake, and are they effectively functioning? If not...
Now, the bit I'm going to focus on there is, are they effectively functioning?
Yes.
That's going to be going to be a focus there.
Yeah. If not, call a stake safeguarding specialist and arrange for training with family services within 30 days. And I think the effectively functioning part, who decides that? It's probably the family services person that's received training. So this safeguarding specialist, you should probably, Sarah, receive some visits from a family services person maybe once a quarter to check in how you're doing. That's what I would think. What are your thoughts?
That'd be good. Yeah, I think that sounds really good. I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought that one forward, but I think that's a really good to actually make sure that safeguarding specialists are having a regular check-in with family services. And that they are saying, are you functioning? Are you doing this right? And that's really important. And
this is an appropriate 30-day deadline. None of this complete the training within 30 days nonsense. This is, if you don't have one, get one within a month. And you've got a month to find someone and get them training and get them set up with training.
Which contradicts that earlier point when it says they may call a state safeguarding specialist. There is no may, it's they must.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. It's almost like when saying may, they were almost using it not in the sense of may or may not, but have permission to.
Yes.
That's almost the way it needs to be read. You are allowed to call this what sounds like a made-up calling by some activists who have been chattering on about it online. No, it is real, and you may do so. It's almost the way you got to read it. Has each member of the you get to audit this, Sarah? Has each member of the stake ward working with children, youth, or vulnerable adults been DBS checked? If not, suspend service of the individual in their calling until completed. I love the idea, Sarah, of you bursting into a classroom and dragging someone out by their ear, saying you've not been checked, Sonny Jim.
Can I say somebody asked me the question at church this morning to say, when the primary president goes on their 2-week summer holiday, that's going to come up because it always does in July or August, they usually ask me to stand in for primary. But listening to your podcasts and listening to what you've been saying about DBS checks, what do I say about that? And, we were able to have that discussion about, if you haven't got a DBS check, can't do it. And, so that's the reality, isn't it? These things happen. Somebody's away on holiday for 2 weeks and we go and ask our best mate to stand in for us. Well, actually, no, you don't, not anymore.
The days are gone of going and grabbing someone from the corridor to do something.
Yeah, maybe wards. Sorry.
I'm going to say, how many times have any of us rocked up at church to be told as you're walking through the door, oh, so-and-so who teaches you Sunday school's away today, can you teach a lesson?
All the time.
Know, constantly.
Maybe ward councils need to be a little bit more proactive in their planning. And if they're coming up to July, August time, they're saying, okay, let's get a broad view here of, can we get, when are people likely to be away on their holidays? Do we know roughly? Okay, we're going to have to do skeleton church this month and this month, or these weeks, because we just literally do not have enough feet on the floor with the right DBS checks in the right callings to make it work.
Combined youth classes are safer than an un-DBS checked person teaching a class for a week.
So
Absolutely.
that will be part of that ongoing discussion about how you do good safeguarding, which is you're proactive and you plan ahead for known events. It's known that people go on summer holidays. It's known that in bad weather, particularly elderly people won't be coming to church to do their callings because they don't want to do the drive. They don't want to drive in icy weather. All of those things can be planned for. You just have to be flexible and not expect to be able to still give the facade of we're going to do everything at the cost of safety.
Yeah, absolutely. Has each member of the stake or ward required to complete the Protecting Children and Youth online training, completed it within 1 month of being sustained? They should just be completing it straight away. If not, suspend service of the individual and their calling until completed. Very good. Again, just right, you don't get to do this calling, because what this is spotting people that have slipped through the net for some reason. And then number 4, has the stake ward council undertake safeguarding training in the last 12 months? And this, I think,
why can't
is the crux of why they want it to be a high councilman. Go on. Sorry.
Why can't we? Everybody else gets suspended from their calling if they haven't done it. Why don't they say, can you
imagine that?
They haven't done it.
Imagine that. But this is why I think they want it to be a high councilman, because they have the authority to walk in. Sorry, there's a little bit of a delay there on the line with Sarah. So they get to walk in as a high councilman to these ward councils and go, have you done your training? They're going to be less pleased about a lowly female, as it's viewed in this patriarchal society, coming in and calling them all to task. And it's going to ruffle some feathers, I think, but I'm very excited to see women take up these roles in the church, because it's going to turn some heads.
I had my first email a few weeks ago about some actions that I had to take about the safeguarding training, and actually there was a little message at the end of it saying, and please, can you just be kind to people? I thought, I'm always kind to people. I thought, what is that about? What do you mean? Would
the stake high councilman receive that same message? This is the thing, because women, if they are receiving these callings, will be involved in making decisions about male leadership right up to sort of a stake level here. And when you go sort of higher into LDS family services, if Mary Curry was sort of asking about, how ideally the church lawyer should be consulting with the stake safeguarding specialist. Well, if that person's a woman, you don't have any actual person who is. It just doesn't look the same that it currently looks, and it really is going to ruffle some feathers. And I think it's important that it does. That's how it has to look.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've used an analogy. So,
please, another Heath analogy.
I love.
This is my. Do you want me to be nice or do you want me to be kind? There's too many nice people in Mormon church, and niceness is falseness often, and niceness actually allows abuse to continue to go on. And if I was rushed into the accident and emergency room because I had a nasty fall off the back of a motorbike, got road rash, covered in grit and things that needed to be sorted out. And my nurse came in and just went, there, that looks really nasty, but, it'll be okay. We'll just put a little bit of a plaster over it. You'll be okay. That's being nice. But now I'm going to get a infected wound and I'm going to be suffering because you didn't actually mend that broken bone that I've got. I need somebody who says, this is going to hurt. This is going to be really hard, but the kindest thing for me to do now is to irrigate that wound, bite down on this, Ruth, deal with it. We're going to clean it out. We're going to sterilize it. We're going to get you down and get that fracture dealt with. And that is the kind thing to do. In this instance, we don't want Sarah to be nice, because nice in this instance is smiling and keeping those egos in the way that they've been used to being treated.
Yeah.
The kind thing is to go in and say, this needs to change. This is the healthy thing to do. And it is going to be painful while we go through the process of change. But that is the kind thing to do for this organisation.
Because what you're doing is you're going in and you're saying this environment that we've been living in for so long that has fostered abuse and allowed abuse to happen, we're going to have to turn it on its head. And part of that is this little boys club is going to be go.
Yeah.
Do you mind to...
Oh, sorry,
Sarah,
Jane first. No, Jane first.
Well, I was just gonna really quickly talk about some of the assumptions that will be made after this. So in the comments, it's not about the assumption that women don't engage in abuse. It's that professional standards suggest that women are easier to disclose to than men. There are fewer barriers when it's women who are the safeguarding officers. They're considered to be safer people. It's a lot harder to disclose to a bishop because I don't know who you're going to tell. So having an independent calling is really, really helpful. We do have concerns that the fifth Sunday is going to be when safeguarding training is going to be delivered. But what's really exciting is that wards are already expressing that as a concern and are saying, okay, December is when the next, okay, we want to have it sooner than that though. So how can we do this differently to make sure that everyone avails themselves of that? And the fact that we're talking about this really important subject, that if youth is carrying on over here and primary is carrying on over here, the people who are staffing those callings have to be part of these discussions. Now, there's none of this presentation that is a discussion. And I think it's even quite triggering, whenever we go around the slides and we're sort of assigned to read them, because that's how it's going to look in the wards. Bishops are going to have to make decisions about what's being presented, and ideally leadership are going to have discussions about making sure this is updated well ahead of time to flag all of this information. See, 21st century saints are delighted. This is huge news that this is happening. No one has compelled the church to do this. But what we've always said is we want it to be the very best that it can be. So we're going to criticize the things that are not good, and we're also going to amplify the things that are good. So while the world is about to start looking at this, we need to be looking at how we evolve it and get it right. This isn't, I don't think, about church leaders who are trying to trick us by, let's agree to do safeguarding and we're going to make it really crap. This is like a first step on a road to evolving training, and it has to be critiqued. So we're hoping to sort of do this in a really positive way. Now, the final thing that I need to say that this is going to be an issue in the UK. People are going to be released and people are going to make assumptions about the reasons for those releases. Please don't do that. There can be a variety of reasons why someone either doesn't want the DBS check or things that have happened historically that have got no bearing on any sort of criminality or something that would bar them from serving in a particular calling. You do not make assumptions about why releases happen or why callings are not going to be extended. And I think what we'll do as 21st century saints is we'll cover that in an episode about what are some of the reasons why it does not necessarily mean what you think it might mean.
Yeah,
Sarah's screen's frozen. I just want to say that actually I've forgotten what I want to say. So Sarah, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that is incredibly important, that we do not have any kind of a witch hunt, any kind of vigilante. Oh, let's try and suss out who the people are who've just been released. I wonder what was on their DBS. You don't know it was anything to do with a DBS, so don't do it.
People
not
get
a
released
public
for all
talk.
kinds of reasons.
We're being asked about that quite a lot. Who gets the information? Do parents get notified? No, they don't. This DBS checks, you have to agree to them, and the person who gets to put eyes on that DBS check at the moment is, well, the church lawyer, as we've expressed concern about that. But if it's not him, the numbers are very, very minimal. So you're talking about one or two people, and they are trusted people.
Well, data privacy is paramount.
No assumptions.
Yeah, it has to be. It has to be.
Yeah, I want to say to you ladies, thank you very much. I want to show people this final slide, the additional resources. If you go to uk.churchofjesuschrist.org, you'll find all this stuff, and you can look through this PowerPoint yourself. You can look through the other resources, flag up anything that you see to us. It'd be really helpful. I think to echo what Jane has said as we finish up tonight is to say that this is a document or a presentation that was produced by the same sort of people that until particularly Sarah started telling them what you've got isn't good enough, thought what they had was good enough.
Yeah.
And thought that they had no reason, and said to a government inquiry they thought they had no reason to adopt DBS checks because they thought the system they had was gold standard and was absolutely fine. So that is the mind, the collective mind that produced this. And fair play to them for now trying, but they've had to be informed all the way along by Sarah, by Ruth, by Jane, by myself, by all the people involved in this. They've had to be informed what your legal liabilities are. Actually, no, this doesn't quite work the way you think it does. And so what we're not trying to be mean here. I'm being a little bit mean to Richard G. Scott because he said some abhorrent things. But I'm trying not to be mean here about this. We're trying to be as constructive as we can by saying, no, this is how it should actually look. Informed by Sarah's experience and by, I believe, all of our experience working in care professions in one way or another. We've all had DBS checks at one point in our lives, and we've all worked with vulnerable people. We've all got experience in this. Sarah, the most out of all of us. And we're trying to help make sure that when this comes to the 5th Sunday near you, you're not going to have to put your hand up and go, actually, this isn't right. And I hope you won't have to do that. I hope you'll visit this website, you'll send us all the things, we can send it on, and the church will listen and continue to grow, because that's the aim of the game. So thank you very much, ladies, for joining with, and I'll sign off by saying thank you to you all for watching. And make sure you subscribe and like the video. And if you like, become a monthly donor, support the channel, support everything we do. One last flash on the screen from the ladies. Say goodbye to everyone, and have a great evening. See ya.
Oiva.
That's a chaotic ending. Bye.